Hey everybody, so today I wanted to talk to you a little bit about preparing for winter. As many of you know by this point that my family and I are off-grid. We do have an electrical pole on the property, and we do have like a water connection for rural water at the very end of our property, but it's one of those things that neither of those things are actually connected yet. We are actually working on getting the electrical connected. We don't necessarily want to live permanently on the grid, like relying on the electrical power from the electrical company. Our goal in the future is actually to be fully on solar power. However, right now with winter coming up, and last winter in this part of Oklahoma, it got to like -9 or -20 or something like that. It was in the negatives. And all I know is being in the negatives in a camper is not really going to work necessarily being on a generator and like a little space heater kind of deal. So there are certain measures that we have to take in order to get prepared for winter. One of them is going to be winterizing the camper. Obviously, like if anybody that lives in cold areas, I mean, even us, when we lived in Florida, we'd still like insulate our pipes, like our water spigots and stuff like that for the winter time. Because even in Florida, it can get down into the 20s and things like that. So it's going to be things like winterizing our camper, making a dog house area for our dogs. Our sheep already have a shade structure, and that's something that we have already talked. My husband and I have kind of made the plan of talking about how we are going to keep them warm should they need to be. At this point, though, the vast majority of them have about 4 years of wool on them. So they should be pretty good in the sense of being able to stay warm. But obviously, having livestock, that's something you still have to keep an eye out for, is making sure your livestock are okay. But we are talking about how we're going to build a dog house for our dogs, for them to be able to get out of the weather. We do have 5 dogs. We will probably use heat lamps of some sort for our dogs because living in a camper, I mean, 2 of our dogs are Great Pyrenees, so they're huge. One of them is a Beagle mix. The other one's like a Rhodesian Ridgeback mix or something like that. And then the other one's an Anatolian Shepherd mix. So minus the Beagle mix, we have 4 very large dogs. So it's one of those things where we can't necessarily keep them in our camper. So that's something we've talked about with having a dog house and potentially a heat lamp like you would have for chickens, connected to the dog house at certain times of day, especially in the evening, to keep them warm. Cats, we can bring our cats inside. That's not really a big deal. We can bring our cats into the house and let them outside to go to the bathroom and everything. Our cats are pretty well house trained anyways, so that's not a big deal. But there's things like that. Also, things we have to think about too is IBCs, water, things like that, because we will not be hooked up to water. Still, we won't have any running water here on property. So we do have to think about how we're going to prep our IBCs and everything like that for getting into the negatives. Now, I know it takes a lot of very cold weather to actually freeze solid water. So I don't necessarily expect our IBCs to turn into giant ice cubes or anything like that. But that is something that we still have to talk about and think about, is how we're going to keep our water stored and stored properly so that we still have use of water throughout the winter time. Typically, winters in Oklahoma are rather mild. They're not, honestly, from what I've heard, not too terribly much different than Florida. Maybe some colder days, and obviously there is snow. But typically the snow doesn't stick around for very long. Last year was quite the anomaly when it comes to weather. But when it comes to living off grid or being on a homestead or anything like that, whether you're connected to the grid or not, you have to prepare for those anomalies. You have to prepare for the fact that, hey, it may get really, really cold and the power may go out. We had family actually in Texas during last year's snowstorm that went all the way down into Texas, and they were out without power for, gosh, I want to say almost a week or so. It was quite a while. And luckily, our family had like propane stoves and fireplaces and things like that. So they had ways to keep themselves warm. But at the same time, like, they didn't have generators or anything like that. So there's certain things you have to do to prepare for the worst case scenario, whether you're in a house and fully connected to the grid or anything like that, or if you're living off grid or living partially on grid or whatever, no matter what you're doing, if you're in a climate where it does get cold or have the potential for getting really cold, you need to make sure that you're preparing for kind of like the worst case scenario. Do you want the worst case scenario to happen? Absolutely not. But will you need to actually even use some of those worst case scenario preps? Maybe not. But if you have them, you're a lot better off than if you don't have them. So that's just something to think about. Like I said, our big things, honestly, is just finding ways to keep ourselves warm, keeping our animals warm, making sure that the water doesn't get frozen solid or anything like that. With our plants, we're not a lot of the fall type plants, fall garden type plants. We don't really eat as a family. Like, we don't eat broccoli, we don't eat cauliflower. I'm the only one who eats greens, like spinach or anything, in our family, and I don't even eat it that much to really warrant growing it. So I don't know if we're really gonna do a fall garden or not. But I still do have a lot of herbs that are growing and growing very well that I don't want to lose. So we are going to be building some sort of greenhouse, whether it's a more permanent greenhouse with the glass sheets that we have, or whether it's just one of like those hoop house type things that you see with cattle panel and like visqueen basically over the top of it. That will probably end up being what we do, just because we have so few plants that we actually have to try to protect from the weather. But that's just things to think about, guys. That's what we're doing here, prepping for winter. My husband right now is actually way out in the field working on electric fencing, and making sure that's all set up and ready to go for his next trip, actually. So it's a lot of fun. We're working here on the homestead, getting things ready. It is getting cooler. You see me, I'm in long sleeves. It'll still get up into the 80s today, but right now it is a bit chilly. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm totally excited that I have long sleeves on. Now, granted, I also have yoga pants and sandals, so it's very Floridian-ish of me still to be in, like warmer clothes, but sandals still. But the weather's changing, definitely, and it's definitely time for us to start prepping and getting ready for that, and be mindful of that, and don't get caught, getting caught where you're not doing it ahead of time. Make sure, for anybody who lives on a homestead, or even if you don't live on a homestead, like I said, even if you're connected to grid power, make sure you're doing things so that you are prepared for if the power should go out or anything like that, to keep you and your family safe and warm, and also all your animals safe and warm as well. All right, guys, hope you have a great day. Bye.